And then him saying to me that these types of societies were the most peaceful people on the planet, and me going, well, mate, come on, you can't just say it. He goes, no, I'm like a professor at UCL, and this, by the means by which we measure these types of societies, these egalitarian anarchical societies come out as the most peaceful types of society on the planet. And there it is, we think anarchy equals bloodshed and murder and what have you, and yet there it is, the anarchical societies of egalitarianism are the most peaceful societies.
Welcome back to the channel, people. Subscribe if you're finding this valuable. I thought I'd do this intro outdoors, as a lot of my recordings lately are going to be online and they're also inside the van. I'm finding that a better space to actually record, allows the conversations to go deeper. But intros, let's do them outdoors as I explore, going around the country in my van, connecting with like minds and getting more powerful in-person conversations brought to you. This one is online. Bruce Parry, though, I did spend some time with him at a recent retreat called Primal Gathering. Check that out. I'm going to put a link to that in the bio. That's where I've been. But Bruce Parry, documentarian. He is soon to be author. He's writing a book at the moment, which we talk about, all about different ways of being and living in the world. And he's taken inspiration from spending time with tribes, spending time with cultures and sampling different, more potentially natural ways of coexisting with each other, learning how we can live in communities and what we can take and then impart wisdom into live in a more sustainable way, developing a relationship with the earth, but also developing a relationship with each other and prioritizing the community. We talk at length about all of this stuff in this podcast. So I hope you find it valuable. Please subscribe. Enjoy. To be honest, this podcast has its roots in understanding what it means to be human. And since going on that journey of like unlearning and trying to weave my way past all the conditioning and when you feel like you've been wrong about certain key things about us as humans or about yourself, you then start to question everything. And it's kind of it's the fabric of our times in a way, where we're looking around thinking, okay, well, this doesn't make sense. Well, we start to question things and the momentum is still going, but a lot more people are questioning the direction we're going. And using technology, it's obviously never been a better time to start diving into why and how and all these big questions. So the roots of the podcast were really like why, what makes us human, but what in a simple sense, like what. And since diving into that question, I love the analogy, like what primary state is H2O. It really depends on so much: environment, temperature, pressure. Like our environment does shape us. And to be honest, the human, as you know, we have the capacity for so much. And it is very dependent on our environment. But there are a few core things that are innate and we couldn't live without, like love, connection. We just couldn't make it past infancy without these things. And since doing a lot of research, like diving into books like Guns, Germs and Steel, and I don't know if you're familiar with Jared Diamond's work and Chris Ryan. Like I grew up pretty much listening to Chris Ryan, Civilized to Death and Sex at Dawn, and like trying to understand like where we've come from, looking through everything through the eyes of evolution. And got so curious about parts of the world which were untouched and people of the world that were still living in a way that we have been for hundreds of thousands of years. So that's kind of where our conversation starts, really, because I know you've delved into this quite heavily, and I just can't wait to see what comes up in the conversation, really.
Nice one. Yeah, me too, man. There's basically that's the area that all that you described there is also where I spend my time thinking and feeling, as well as obviously having the privilege of experiencing. That's I guess my USP is having had the opportunity to live with so many different indigenous peoples around the world and visit so many different cultures, that certain things have come into focus as a result of those experiences, which I don't think I could have picked up from books.
No, absolutely. Does it ever feel like a burden? And how do you navigate that to like understand a real pure way and a glimpse into a world which is entirely possible? And I feel like you know that the way en masse that we're living just isn't really in accordance to alignment in a physical sense, but also in a planetary sense, and it could be done in such a creatively different way. Does that ever feel like heavy for you to carry, and how's that been navigated over the years?
Yeah, thanks, man. It's a nice question. Yes, sometimes it feels like I'd never called it a burden. I'd often think of it as a responsibility. But then a responsibility is double-edged. It's like, it can feel heavy at times, but it's an amazing reason to jump out of bed because you've got something to do. And so that's kind of more how I see it. It's like it's given me a drive. It's given me a sense of purpose that I've got a part to play in this funny game of human design of how it is we're going to figure out how to go forwards. And because I have such privilege in experiencing really, really amazing, harmonious ways of being, and we'll come back to that in a second, no doubt. But because I really touched it, it's real for me. It's not just like some utopian dream. It's like, no, I can see and understand how we can exist together. I've also researched the tools. And so I believe that some of this is transferable to today. And I've now, I've got a responsibility to get these ideas out. Doesn't mean that they're going to be taken up, but if they're not known, then there's no chance. So that's my drive. And that feels good. I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm optimistic, but hope is different, and hope is a reason to move forwards. And I also think, I believe in us as a species. I think we're capable of the most extraordinary positive ways of being, and we could actually create the most extraordinary heavenly space for us all. But we're not going in that direction at the moment, as you know. And so for me, it's not about turning back the clock. It's not like I think we should all go and live like the Panan or the Benjeli and go back to being nomadic hunter-gatherers. That's not the answer. I think this journey we've been on of separation and all of these really difficult, complex problems that have come for us have also at the same time allowed us to invent and create extraordinary stuff and also understand so much. So I think that the merging of that technological ingenuity and sort of like certain types of knowledge can be mixed with a deeper wisdom of how we can live together and to create something that's even better than it ever was. So I'm a believer in moving forwards, but we need to change direction quite rapidly.
Yeah. So one of the most inspiring things that came out of the last 3 years of the whole COVID and the pandemic and shutdowns was so much happened so quickly that it was like almost possible that we could change things in an instant and shift direction and focus on what was most important almost overnight. And regardless of, why that was, it was still possible for us to create money in an instant and shift industry and stop things and prioritize other things. And it was like, well, wow, if we could do this in a different way, it would be pretty powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that you just have to look at how certain religions have spread in history very fast. It's like, what's the phrase? It's like nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And you look at how certain movements have grown, and they generally tend to always have something in there which is beneficial for the people. I mean, people move to Buddhism because they can escape from the caste system. It's like there's something that resonates, even if they don't buy the whole thing, and they can move into that. And I think that we're waiting now. We're desperately ready for the next good idea, but I don't think it's going to be a centralized one. I think that what we saw there, the rapid movement of central authority and central power, isn't going to be where this next movement comes from. I think that they can't actually give us what we want. I think that they're too wrapped up in holding on to power that they can't think long term and think for the real benefit of everyone. So I think that this idea has to be promulgated widely to the general populace, and it's not a revolution in the sense of a them and us. It's a sort of like it's a transformation of the wider society, which ultimately then dissolves the center. That would be the dream, but we got to want it, you know. And right now, most people aren't living their lives with the type of, I don't know you, but like, you know, it seems like you've been on a deep journey of really feeling into your impact on the planet and feeling into who you are as a human being and feeling into, you know, the future generations and what's going to store for them. But that's not what's happening with most people walking up and down the high street. You know, we're not in that space yet, and we've got a long way to go for that, and we've got to do a lot of healing. So, you know, it's quite possible it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Absolutely. How's your healing journey been? And when did that begin?
Like, go.
I was going to say, I was watching an interview when you were talking about cannibals and crampons, and you were saying it was like an ego trip, and that was more about kind of a vanity mission, or we could be the people that get to the top kind of thing. And it's like adolescence, isn't it? It's like before maturation, I guess. Did that play into the introspection and the growth when you look back on that?
I mean, it's an indication of where I was at, very much so. Yeah, I was I came from a place that didn't really have any kind of insight into how to look at oneself and take responsibility and go on an inner journey and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I came from a very religious family, and that had its own code, which was in its own way okay. But no, I hadn't even began to start really sort of like peeling back the layers and revealing what was beneath. So yeah, I mean, like I came, I mean, I was in the military. I was like, you know, super sort of English boarding school, Christian military kind of institutionalized kid, you know, Queen and country. That was me. And
you used to salute every time the stand at attention when the national anthem was on. How did you get from that to
but that you know, a whole bunch of different steps. You can't ever put all of that in one transition. But having amazing girlfriends who made me question the really gross stuff. It's like, what's all this sort of nationalism nonsense? It's like, why? And then, you know, and then plant medicines, meditation, the usual package, moving to Ibiza, doing like every type of healing modality that there is, giving up sex, drugs, and alcohol for a few years. All of it. You know, just I dove in deep, and I got a little bit lost in that too, which you can, sort of like dabbled with some philosophies and traditions and beliefs that gave me a great deal and were very healing, but aren't where I'm at now. So just finding my way through, really, like we all are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned me going quite on a deep journey. I guess it's still unraveling, of course, but it's so imperative to what I believe is a life of one, sustainability, but also like from a personal point of view, like health and longevity, but also like what creates fulfillment and meaning in my life, like making things sacred and, being immersed in the woods and doing real simple things that we've done since the dawn of time, like just gathering around a fire with a bunch of friends. Like it's these real simple ancestral things that make life sacred again. And I can learn to listen, and I can learn to remember. My body feels like it just remembers what it feels like to be connected to people, to see people, to it just feels like the only thing I want to spend my time doing. And then that permeates into everything that I do, what I create. It's really like I'd love to know how you you're living day to day, and what your life's like. What are your practices now, and what does that look and feel
Mm.
like?
Well, I'm living in Wales. I'm looking out the window at a few inches of snow. I'm in my overalls because I'm painting. Um, and I'm I'm at a slight crossroads. If I'm honest, I don't know if I'm staying here. I want to live in community. I want to live in a certain type of community. I'm negotiating that with various different groups as to whether that is something that comes about or not. um, I um, I try and live simply, but at the same time, I have a deep awareness of the fact that even me trying to live simply is having an incredible impact on the world. Um, and so I try to feel into that. I think that's my practice, is to try and balance the the feeling, not just the cognitive understanding, but actually feel into my impact on the planet, while at the same time also not forgetting to enjoy and party and celebrate, the blessings of life. And so holding both of those is my practice. And in order to be able to feel, then that means sort of being present. And so I used to have quite a regular meditative practice, but now I try and bring it into just general awareness during the day. I think foraging is my favorite form of meditation these days. And to be really to go on a walk, but also to be looking and to feel into what's around you, rather than just whistling and looking at the horizon or whatever it is that we normally do, and basically be in the abstract mode, but to actually come into my body and senses, which is what it's all about for me. So they're my practices, really. And yeah, and I don't know. I mean, there's even talk of me going back to TV. So that's a really complex moment for me. It's like, well, I've been quite proud of the fact that I haven't flown for years, and have lived quite a simple life, and then to go back into that sort of like high carbon, excessive way of life, which is of course amazing and enjoyable and a huge privilege, but it's like it's a ship. And so I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking and discussing, to go back into that world. And the main reason for that, actually, if I'm honest, I hope no one from the BBC is listening, is because I still feel that I have some stuff, I'd like to still have a voice, and I definitely have things I'd like to share. Not that they're going to come out in my programs, but to bring myself back into that space. I kind of don't get engaged in social media. I'm not very good at self whatever the word is, promotion, but I'm happy to speak when invited. And I do feel I have things to say when people want to hear them. So so yeah, we'll see.
So taking yourself away from, let's say, the chaos of the city, how is that when you go back? Do you find yourself that you're more sensitive? You have to really do it in small doses and be mindful? Or how does it feel?
Going back to the city.
Yeah, and just being in and amongst like office buildings and all sorts, like having spent so much time deep in deep in
I
nature.
can totally do it. I can totally do it. I'm all right in the city. I can enjoy it. I mean, I don't want to live in the city again, but it's like I there was a period of time when I was in a phase of rejection and a phase of kind of I wouldn't say hatred because I don't like that term. I don't feel that was true to me, but like dislike, like a feeling that I knew better, and sometimes walking around think you're all gonna die. It's like that kind of mentality, looking at everyone in the city going, you've got no idea how fragile this place is. This is chaos, as well as feeling myself close down in my sort of empathic capacity to connect. It's like closing down, so that because it's all too chaotic. So all of that. But then I kind of moved away from that. And now I have much more joyful experience in those spaces. I think that a lot of the time and I see this in sort of in my activism phase, quite often my wanting to get angry and to shout at the system and stuff was actually mostly just me shouting at myself, because I hadn't fully embodied those things that I was aware of, but I wasn't actually fully embodying in my daily life. And so what I later realized was that a lot of that angst and was just projection of my own shadow out at other. And then when I realized it was my own shadow, it's like, oh, actually, yeah, God, I'm part of the problem here too. It's not just you guys, it's us. And I'm really grateful for that shift in awareness for me, because it brings about a very different type of communication when you try and make change. It's a dialogue rather than a shout, because we ultimately have to get through this together. And there's a chance that we won't, but we're all part of that, And so there's definitely institutions that aren't great, and there's definitely people that aren't careful, but at the same time, there's sort of like, we have to bring the compassion into that, and the awareness that we're also, I am part of the global 1 or 2% causing the biggest problems in the world. It's like the rest of the world has very real reason to be angry at me. And we're all very good at being the victim and pointing the finger and going, you're the problem. But there's not enough reflections like, actually, no, it's also me. It's like very much that, especially living in a rich nation like ours that is raping the world still, as we are. We hide it very well, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing. What do you feel the biggest thing we can do? And it's I don't like asking these types of questions, but maybe just speaking from your own experience, like for example, not flying and being mindful of travel and spending your money, voting with your money. What are you spending your money on? I think those things for me have been really impactful, just on my own awareness. And yes, the side of myself that would judge others but then still do those actions, until I start to look at the things that I'm doing. I feel like somewhat it's really hard to do that when it's just you on your own. Like, do you have a community or friends that you check in with and that reflect things back at you, or you have these types of discussions around community? Because I'd love you to share a bit more about that, and what in certain communities that you've found that people would reflect things back to each other if people were acting in a certain way that didn't really represent their values.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that being in community with people is the first big step. I'm not doing that right now, so there's something that I recognize needs to happen, but it's not happening yet. I had a very close, very nearly moved into community with a really wonderful group of people here in Wales who live just up the road, and that didn't quite happen, and for a whole bunch of reasons. We didn't quite come together under a shared vision, and I think that's really vital. And in many ways, that's because I was holding on to something that I wasn't necessarily willing to let go of, and that was problematic. And so my response to that is that I'm going to try and express these things a little bit more clearly. I'm writing a book, trying to write a book, and so to get them out so that perhaps people can come together under that. but yeah, within that, there's lots of different types of communities. Some people in the communal space don't like having an environment whereby we're all holding each other to account. And I get that, but I personally think that's really cool. I mean, I definitely could do with it. It's like, weirdly, the people that I've just been living with are all living much more humbly than me. I'm the one that needs to be held to account, more than anyone else, actually. And I recognize that, and I invite that. I want that, but only held to account, not by other individuals who are saying that they know better, but by a code, a vision of a value system that we've all agreed to beforehand. That's what I'm happy to be held account to, not just to random people wanting to say what they want to say, because that just leads to conflict. But if we've all agreed to a set of values, then I'm happy to sort of let go of everything into a space with a group of people and let go to that. That's kind of what the dream was. It's like, let's create a tribe. Let's let go of individualism, come together as a group, and with this very clear set of values that we've articulated as clearly as possible, with a whole bunch of methodologies for how to deal with each other if we don't step up. And so that done in the most beautiful way.
I think
Terrifying.
It scares me. Yeah, it really scares me. It feels like that's what my heart wants, but I'm so fearful that I'd invest so much time and energy into something. And of course, I bring myself back to the moment. It's all learning and growth, and all a process and an experiment in a way. But there's a fear there that I guess I've been potentially doctrinated by media or films where these things happen, and then inevitably there's a rupture, and it just leads to kind of chaos. I don't know. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
But what would you?
I mean, like, there's no way in our chat now we can go through all of the ins and outs, but there's most, like, 90% of intentional communities fail within the first 5 or 10 years. It's like there's many people with great dreams, and then the human stuff comes in, and that's the stuff that you've heard about, and everyone likes to talk about, and the Daily Mail will mention, and da. But there are also some communities that are really many generations in now, and they're success stories, and there's also a number of people who've done lots of research on what's working and what isn't working, etc. So that space is something that I've dabbled with. Well, not dabbled, I've dove in deep into that, and then mixed that with my own understanding, having lived with tribal people. Many of these communities here have tried to base themselves on wisdom that's come from tribal people, and of course, so I'm carrying some of that too. But what I'm really carrying, which for me is my kind of unique selling point, not selling point's a terrible thing to say, but like my unique privilege, let's say, is having lived with egalitarian societies, and they're incredibly rare, but they are, for me, the thing that I would like to emulate, and not many people have spent time with them. So there's something about that I'm really interested in bringing over. So to mix all of the wisdom of how modern intentional communities have worked alongside the egalitarianism is the space that I'm really interested in. But it is, yeah, of course it's terrifying, because it is almost the opposite direction to everything that our society is doing right now. And it's like a life decision. It's getting married. It's like, okay, we jump in, here we go. And it needs to be really understood and articulated and held, and all of these things, as well as amazing healing modalities and decision-making processes, and all of the conflict resolution stuff that's out there, mixed with this understanding of true equality, what true equality is, not just what we think of as equality in our world. And so all of these ingredients thrown in, I think that could be amazing, but it's so big a leap that it's no surprise that right so far it's just talked about and not necessarily emulated. It's yeah, it's really curious. It's really curious, and I don't know. Maybe it'll just be a book that will be a pamphlet for whoever comes out of the ashes of the collapse, and that will be good enough. That will be good enough. But better, how much nicer to turn the ship around before we get there.
Yes, for sure. What do you think the biggest trappings are in starting a community? And I actually got asked by a friend to ask you, like, what would you say is really worth considering when starting a community?
Well, for me, it's all about power. It's all about power, and so wherever we are in our own process with our own community, we see that as like, lots of people like living in a shared house, but there's a landlord, and so clearly the landlord has the power, and that's the problem. But like, you take the landlord away and have everyone co-owning the place, suddenly you've got a whole different type of power, which will come in these other types of ways, whether it's the person who was there first, or the loudest person, or the most charismatic person, or the person who had the more money, or the one who's bringing in the most goods from their job, or from the gardening, or whatever it is. These are other ways that power can manifest. And when power manifests, if it's not dealt with wisely, then that's where the issues arise. And so power needs to be seen, spoken to, never allowed to coalesce, never allowed to ossify, always be in flow, and everyone have an understanding of it and speak to it, and all of this sort of stuff. This is how the egalitarian tribes do it. And so that's, for me, what's really interesting, is to, like, we can all have a community with a guru or a benign dictator, and they hold the power and they do a really good job of making sure everyone's fine. But when that person goes, there's always a power vacuum, and so it doesn't have legs. Whereas an egalitarian tribe, where everyone is fully individual and yet a collective, everyone is absolutely has the same status as everyone else, and we're all working on a daily basis to make sure that stays like that, as the egalitarian tribes do. That's, for me, really interesting. That's the place that I think is really where the work's needed. But and would be great to have an example to show the world. It's like, here we are doing that. I think that would just be the most amazing journey. But it's but it's a hard one. It's a hard one because we're so used to following and leading and thinking that these things are natural. But actually, when you live with an egalitarian tribe, you realize no. They're happy to follow a leader. If so, the best hunter, they're happy to follow that guy. But if he ends up showing off that he's the best hunter, or tries to get more food or anything like that, the rest of the guys will just refuse to hunt with him, and the women refuse to cook his food, and they've got all these tools and methods to make sure that no one starts getting any bigger. And if anyone's down, they bring them up. If anyone's up, they bring them down. But they've got all these methodologies for doing that, which are, for me, fascinating. And they're not about conflict. It's always about removing the power rather than challenging the power. So it's all of this stuff that's fascinating, which is what I'm trying to write about. So for me, that's the thing. That's where communities very often are. Some are working in this space really, really beautifully, but it's where the real work is.
Yeah, it's interesting to lean into that, to know that these energies play out within us all. For whatever reason, like, power does corrupt the mind, and it brings it into this kind of individual again, because our senses can deceive us, right? We are separate, and you can see more than, or want more than, and regardless of where that comes from, it can definitely play out. But then, like you said, the tools and techniques are needed, and that comes from wisdom, right? But we're so diverse now. Everyone's got their own ideas of what success is, of how to spend your time, how much to do, what's enough, what's not enough. Feels like we are so complex. Like, we can't even, like, I look at the family structure, and like 100 years ago, most families would have a lot in common. You'd get on, and it wouldn't be too much to it. But now generations are moving so quickly that 20 years goes by, and you've got two humans who are so different from each other. It's like it feels it's getting so much more complex. And how we bring that back down. Yeah.
Well, I think that I think that it's possible that it won't, that maybe the genie's out of the bottle and the individualized way of being is so it's so ingrained that we won't ever be able to really put the collective before ourselves. But there are a number of things happening globally that might render that up for grabs. It's like, we are for the first time learning about how our true ancestry is, because you think the Enlightenment movement came about, which was a relatively larger movement, came about as a result of us basically hearing back from the Huron and the Cree and these various peoples out in the Americas, and that we'd lost track so much of how other ways of living could be, that this feedback that was coming from the New World, although the Jesuits and everyone who were out there were like all fighting against it, and they didn't really see it because they were stuck in it, but the writings were coming back to Europe and people going, oh my God, these people have extraordinary value systems and all the rest of it. And that in many ways sparked this new way of thinking. So, but what they were encountering out there were wonderful, wise indigenous peoples, but they weren't egalitarian indigenous. They still had like warriors and battles and a whole, the power was out of the box there too. Whereas what we are now touching on is actually the oldest way of being that didn't even make it to the Americas, that actually it's widely believed was how we existed as a species for 95% of our time on this planet. As modern humans. And so that is our most resilient way of being. And these tools and methodologies, but most importantly, the narrative, the understanding that it's even possible, and the stories like, no. At the moment, we live in a narrative of meritocracy. It's like if Elon Musk wants to get rich, it's because he deserves it. It's good for him. But it's like, no. In these societies, that narrative doesn't wash. This narrative is like true egalitarianism. So once this wisdom really lands in the high street, that will be a new thing that has the possibility to inspire, because it feels so real inside. It's like, oh yeah, I'm so finely in tuned to status. I walk into a room and we all figure out where we are. It's like, and I feel so hard done by because the system's rigged, that my state, all of that stuff, we know it, we breathe it. And yet we've accepted it because the narrative has allowed us to accept it. So with that shift, and then the shift that we also have, which is, of course, global problems coming our way with climate change, and the capacity for us all to communicate for the first time ever, and the capacity for us to trust using technology for the first time ever, like truly this window is opening of like proof of personhood and blockchain, that once, I know it's complex stuff and lots of people don't really like it because of the environmental stuff and but like once that stuff, we're just beginning on that, where the real trustworthiness of how we can actually create systems that aren't corruptible, and we can all communicate with each other, and maybe start then interfering with the voting, start interfering with central government, it's like we can actually start removing the power from the center, making our own decisions, as well as coming into the healing modalities as a result of stepping into responsibility. We all know what happens when people step into responsibility. They wake up, they grow, and it will be messy because we're mostly messed up. And so we're going to make some terrible decisions, but better that than it's just central power, central authority, central power, which is just not doing it. So as this wisdom starts mixing with the tech and the reason for it to come about, if people can get the messages out, which is kind of part of what I'm trying to do, then there's real chance that we could start growing again and diffusing and stepping in and taking on board this wisdom. It's a long shot. It's a fanciful dream, really, but what a thing to strive for.
Mm-hmm. Is that anarchy in its truest sense?
I prefer to call it egalitarianism, because anarchy, for me, if you think archy is a curious word, archy like monarchy, one archies, like there's there's so many different, that word archy, like arch demon, arch devil, or that arc word, whatever it means, probably closest to leader, I think. And so anarchy is without leaders. So that's all that word really means. It's for me. Whereas egalitarian, so that's in a sense, it's like a society without something, the word "an," whatever that thing is, this sort of like power leadership thing. Whereas egalitarianism for me is a bit more proactive. It is an anarchical system in that there is no leader, but it has something a bit more about it that requires for more than just the fact that there's no rules and and there's no leader. It's like the egalitarian societies have definitely, they don't have leaders, but they definitely have methodologies and practices and narratives that hold them together. So it's a form of anarchy, yes, but like with so many things, those words, they're not great. I mean, yes, I call myself an anarchist, but if I try and stand on a podium and say anarchy is the way to the average person walking past, they might not be listening.
Some terrible, unlawful person. Yeah, it's it definitely, words and language gets lost, and definitely I try to bring that back because I've listened to a lot of people talk about like the real pure sense of anarchy, and when I went and visit Greece, and watch like the underbelly of a class system just diminish and what was happening there. It was so fascinating to understand that these people were like self-governing and they had their own system, and I don't know if it worked or didn't, but it was happening regardless. And it's quite interesting just to understand.
Yeah, well,
after
the Second World War, Greece was having this agrarian revolution whereby basically everything was becoming decentralized, and people were getting on with their lives in a relatively harmonious way without this sort of central government that was there before. And of course the Brits, being us, or me at least, were could see that if this took off, that was just the end of their central power. So they went in. This is after the Second World War ended, and so everyone was in the sort of like getting back to normal phase, except that Greece was this like getting back to a normal that Brits didn't like because they weren't then going to be listening to us. So we went in. And a lot of people know about that. We went in to reinstate central authority against that, that sort of like relative peaceful sort of like agrarian revolution. So that's what it is. It's like we know we're up against powers that don't want to relinquish, and so that's the other thing that I've learned from my time with some of these indigenous groups, is like how to go about doing that type of revolution that could be successful. But yeah, anarchy's a curious one. I remember when I was living with the Panan, and Jerome Lewis, who's the anthropologist I've learned so much from, and his wife Ingrid Lewis, who are specialized in these egalitarian hunter-gatherer tribes, and then him saying to me that these types of societies were the most peaceful people on the planet, and me going, well, mate, come on, you can't just say it. He goes, no, I'm like a professor at UCL, and this, by the means by which we measure these types of societies, these egalitarian anarchical societies, come out as the most peaceful types of society on the planet. And there it is. We think anarchy equals bloodshed and murder and what have you, and yet there it is. The anarchical societies of egalitarianism are the most peaceful societies, and approved by a wide margin, and have shown to be so by all these studies. Except that that doesn't mean that for us to just like to just change overnight wouldn't be messy. It would. We need to step into our responsibility and grow and heal at the same time. So all of that has to be synonymous. But just like Kant said before the French Revolution, it's like, well, I'm terrible at quotes, but like along the lines of the populace need to be given their freedom in order to grow into the wisdom of their freedom, rather than expect to only give it to them when they have stepped into that space. It's like you can't do it that way around.
Sure.
You've got to actually
Yeah.
let them have their power back in order for them to grow. And that will be the biggest fight around this narrative, if this ever sort of gets anywhere as far as a public debate is concerned. Is any time I talk to friends of mine who are, you know, from wealthy families or peers of the realm or whatever, and I have this conversation, that they're like, thank you, Bruce, sounds wonderful, amazing, but like, you know, but the people, but they're, you know, they haven't woken up yet. And I'm like, they haven't woken up yet because you haven't done a good job of allowing them to wake. It's like being in everyone's interest that everyone's sort of like, you got your knee on their neck kind of thing. And so it's no surprise. And so that's going to be the debate, is that at the moment we have representative democracy because we think that we need the experts to make the decisions. But actually that's proven to be not working. It's not working for us. We can't make those decisions because everyone gets wrapped up in looking after themselves, and you know, central power just is corrupted always. So that's where, to me, the lot of the work can be done, but it has to come down to stories at the end of the day. What do we want? And not only nationally, but internationally. It's like we also have to recognize that we are incredibly privileged because we've got our knee on the neck of half the rest of the world. So that has to equalize out too.
Yeah, for sure. I think its history would show us that collapse, or what you keep referring to as like some hard times, is inevitable in terms of a shift and change of what's to come. When you're giving birth, labor's not easy. So it's like giving birth to a new idea or doing things differently. There's going to be a lot of discomfort along the way. So it's like bracing for that, but knowing that that's part of the growing pains, right?
I think that's the best possible outcome. I mean, like this is us talking about what could happen in a really beautiful way. I mean, the alternative to that is the other alternatives, which is that massive economic downturns, or Russia and China coming together, and all of these other things which are also on. Let's not forget it. You know, they're out there too. You know, we have been in this world of power and competition and hierarchy for a long time, and just because we've been sitting pretty doesn't mean we will forever. And like, you know, civilizations rise and fall, and power bodies have a go at each other all the time. And like, we haven't lived through that, but that is also in the story. And so while we are the powerful, it's so in our interest to go through this shift before we are basically not the powerful anymore, because whoever takes over is not going to be, they're going to be like rubbing their hands and going, whoopee, come on then, let's go. Because that's the phase that tends to be the case. And so you got authoritarianism versus what we think of as democracy. It's not, but like, you know, this world that we're in, but like those two bodies of empire are sort of like bristling up against each other, and that's real, that's happening, and we all get very caught up in this other stuff. But it's, you know, it's the world is changing fast, and the global warming is going to mean more droughts, more migration. Vast swathes of the world are going to be uninhabitable. The pressures that are going to start increasing. You've just seen the announcement about us not letting in boats, and it's like we're going to have to. There's so much darkness on the horizon if we don't figure out. If we don't get these messages out, it's like it could be really, really horrible.
But there's one thing talking about it, and there's another thing bringing it back into the moment, into the day to day and the moment to moment. What does that look like? There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of talk, and all these things are so relevant. And I think there is go back to my earlier, that I feel it's not a burden, but it's that somewhere close to the feeling. It's like some sort of, it's the generation, the new generation that are feeling this anxiety. It's like it's anxiety. It manifests in anxiety of like, what is the future and what does it look like? because we know so much, but knowing a lot doesn't necessarily translate to doing a lot. And there's loads of important conversations happening, but I personally try and bring it back down to the day. It's like, what am I building? What's my mission? How am I translating my health and well-being to service to people just generally day to day, and wider communities? How am I building community? How am I putting these messages out there to try and allow individuals to see that they are such an intrinsic part of it all? And it's really does come down to the individual. Like, yes, we're not separate, and the collective is the focus, but we can only do what we can do. We can choose to do things, to act in ways, to be kinder, to be more loving to ourselves, to go on that journey of healing. And it really comes down to us as individuals to make those decisions, right?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's I mean, there's as you keep saying, there is no separation. It's like, it's very easy to point the finger, as I said earlier, and go, well, I'm not the problem. It's all of those richer people over there. It's all of those corporations. It's the government. It's all the rest of it. But of course, we're absolutely intrinsically linked to all of them. The corporations are wealthy because we buy their stuff. The government's there because we vote, because they promised us have a slightly better life than the Green Party, who, whoever. It's like, no one's actually voting for party that's telling us that we've got to make some changes that are going to be difficult, but everyone votes for the group that tells them that everything's going to be a bit better, and so we're all part of this, and our actions on a daily basis, where what I purchase is having a massive impact on the whole world, and so these things are really overwhelming when we take them on board. It's like the very understandable response is to throw your hands in the air and go, well, what can I do? What's one person? And that's something that we need to really work through, because it's hard, and we do feel disempowered. And that's why I quite like ideas of taking away power from the center and re-empowering people. But also, I think that it is about coming together. Making difficult decisions on your own is really treacherous, but making difficult decisions with a group of people can be really joyful. It's like, it's once you've found your meaning and purpose, and if you find other people with the same type of meaning and purpose, then you can actually, it doesn't matter, you can go through all sorts of shit. Who cares? It's like, you can make fun. It's just fun. It's all right, because we got to shift away from trying to place our meaning in our own well-being and our own happiness. It's actually place it in the well-being of something beyond us, the future generations, our kids, anyone. That get away from it just being about me is the first single big narrative shift we've got to make. It's like, it's not about us. It can't be about us. If it's about us, we're over. It's got to be about the future generations. And then once you take that on board, then it doesn't matter. You can walk through the snow and the mud and the rain and the sleep rough and it's okay, because you've got a mission, you've got somewhere you're going, and that's all right. It's better to do that with others. It just makes it more fun. It's very hard on your own.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And if you've got a why, you can bear almost any how. It's like the religious context to how we would have made it through such challenging struggle, if you believe in a bigger sense. And that can simply be like spirit and the unknown kind of is that for me. And I feel like that's like a new way of, not a new way, but it's I see it more often now. It's like not necessarily a religion, but it's a deeper sense of being, and just being okay with the unknown, and having a trust that it's happening for a reason, because who knows, but there is something greater than us that we're a part of, and we don't need to know what it is, So yeah, let's close up, brother. I'll respect your time. I'd like to, what should we end on? Your book. Let's talk about your book and how that you're giving birth to that. How's labor going?
Yeah, I actually, if I'm honest, I haven't put pen to paper or fingers on keyboard for over a month now, so clearly not going as well as it should. I'm struggling. I have to say I'm struggling. I've got so much that I'd like to say. I've got amazing narratives of like anecdotes, and it's all there inside of me, but I do struggle to get it on the page. I'm definitely a better speaker than I am not that I'm an amazing speaker, but I'm definitely, that's better than my writing. And but yet at the same time, I feel super compelled to get it out. I think it's more than a film. I mean, it'd be good to be a book and a film, but like,
what's the context of is it all the things we've been talking about?
Yeah, and so much more. Yeah, that's the surface layer of all of the, what are the tools and narratives? What is the mess? What is the way forwards? What is our true past? How did we go through Apex? How did we go through that first revolution from apex alpha male apes to egalitarian societies? What do we learn from that? And then why did we come out of that 10,000 years ago? And what do we learn from that? And where are we now? And what evolutionary shifts are we going to have to go through in order to try and refine some form of truly resilient way of being going forwards, bearing in mind all this wisdom that we're now learning? So all of that, which has been my work for years now, as well as all of the other stuff that is, the healing modalities and the community living and how to bring up kids and all that stuff that I've learned from the other tribes. So all of that package I've never really put down, so there's that, and that excites me, and there's definitely lots of it, and I've done, it's taken me this long for a lot of it to settle and then to test ideas with people and what have you. I couldn't have written this straight after having lived with all the tribes and gone down the Amazon, around the Arctic. I mean, I got to see globalization, I got to see climate change, they're real, but like the thing that's been the longest work for me is then trying to find the solutions from my experiences. And that's so that's what the book could be. But I'm also running out of I can't really afford to sit around and do it. I don't want to go and get a publisher yet, because they breathe down your neck in the way. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I've just got to go back to work.
Yeah, they're pushy. You want to give it to them, approach them when you've got it.
Yeah,
I've got a book. Yeah, man, it's hard, man, because writing a book, you almost have to. It's not just informing people. It's like you have to have a solution, or no one wants to read it but publish it.
Yeah. No, I definitely have that. I definitely have that. I've got a real pathway forwards that is very clear, and also like visions of extraordinary beauty and wonder that's out the other side. Extraordinary stuff. But it means a transition. But it's all there. It's all there. I definitely can daydream all sorts of with a literal route of how this could unfold.
Could you give us a glimpse of that and what the vision is?
I've touched on it, but yeah, like I think it's all based on what I've learned from the egalitarian societies and how they deal with power and how they know it corrupts and how they come together, and etc. So it's a big one, and yet if it when shared at its deeper level, I've always come across positive response. It's like, oh yeah, I get that now. But it's so out there that it hasn't even ever been contemplated by any sort of philosopher in history. It's like, what? That,
would it require some like renunciation of things, possessions, clothing, like, because I remember watching the Tawai film.
Yeah, I think that I look at it as a move forwards rather than anything else, because that's more attractive and appealing. But it comes also with learning how to feel more deeply. When you feel more deeply, then these things come about anyway. But it's also, at the heart of it is the realization of how we went around this first revolution, which wasn't about challenging the power base using the same quality of power. It's like the women in the first ever revolution who said no to the alpha male to invite the other men to come in, that I've been through the ritual that they reenact that in the Congo. That's like mind-blowing earliest memory of humanity. What is it that we can learn from what those amazing women did, and why did they want to do it? How did they go about achieving it, and what were the tools and methods they did for basically dismantling patriarchy, that's dismantling hierarchy, an aggressive form of competition? How do they do that, and why did they want to do it, and how can we maybe emulate that once again? Because if you look at nearly every revolution that we've had in the last few hundred years, or at least history, they've all been ultimately replaced one type of power base with another, and that we've never really figured it out, whereas they did. And so how do we do that? And a lot of it was about the women, actually. A lot of it was about the wisdom of the women. So that's all in it too, but too much for here.
Beautiful. Yeah, just leave it at that. Nice, man. Appreciate you, and thanks for being open to the conversation and sharing your wisdom and your experience. It's powerful, tangible, and people are going to get a lot from it. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Lovely to meet you. Yeah, thanks for the chat.
Thank you, brother.